Chapter 6. For more reasons than one, the betrothal feast was put off. It was not held until the new year, but Lavrans agreed that the bridal need not therefore be delayed. It was to be just after Michaelmas, as was fixed at first. So Kristin sat now at Jorundgard as Erlend's betrothed in all men's sight. Along with her mother she looked over all the goods and gear that had been gathered and saved up for her portion, and strove to add still more to the great piles of bedding and clothes. For when once Lavrans had given his daughter to the master of Huseby, it was his will that nothing should be spared. Kristin wondered herself at times that she did not feel more glad. But in spite of all the busyness, there was no true gladness at Jorundgard. Her father and mother missed Ulvild sorely, that she saw. But she understood too that 'twas not that alone which made them so silent and so joyless. They were kind to her, but when they talked with her of her betrothed, she saw that they had to force themselves to it to please her and show her kindness. 'Twas not that they themselves had a mind to speak of Erlend. They had not learned to take more joy in the marriage she was making, now that they had come to know the man. Erlend, too, had kept himself quiet and withdrawn the short time he had been at Jorundgard for the betrothal. And like enough, this could not have been otherwise, thought Kristin, for he knew it was with no good will her father had given his consent. She herself and Erlend had scarce had the chance to speak 10 words alone together, and it had brought a strange, unwanted feeling to sit together thus in all folks' sight. At such times they had little to say, by reason of the many things between them that could not be said. There arose in her a doubtful fear, vague and dim, but always present, that perhaps 'twould make it hard for them in some other way after they were wedded, that they had come all too near to each other at the first, and had after lived so long apart. But she tried to thrust the fear away. It was meant that Erlend should visit them at Whitsuntide. He had asked Lavrans and Ranfrid if they had anything against his coming, and Lavrans had laughed a little, and answered that Erlend might be sure his daughter's bridegroom would be welcome. At Whitsuntide they would be able to go out together. They would have a chance to speak together, as in the old days. And then surely it would fade away, the shadow that had come between them in this long time apart, when each had gone about alone, bearing a burden the other could not share. At Easter, Simon Anderson and his wife came to Formoe. Kristin saw them in the church. Simon's wife was standing not far off from her. She must be older than he, thought Kristin, nigh 30 years old. Lady Halfrid was little and slender and thin, but she had a wonderfully gracious face. The very hue of her pale brown hair as it flowed in waves from under her linen coif seemed as it were so gentle, and her eyes too were full of gentleness. They were great grey eyes flecked with tiny golden specks. Every feature of her face was fine and pure, but her skin was something dull and grey, and when she opened her mouth one saw that her teeth were not good. She looked not as though she were strong. Folk said indeed that she was sickly. She had miscarried more than once already, Kristin had heard. She wondered how it would fare with Simon, with this wife. The Jorundgard folk and they of Formoe had greeted each other across the church green more than once, but had not spoken. But on Easter Day Simon was in the church without his wife. He went across to Lavrans and they spoke together a while. Kristin heard Ulfhild's name spoken. Afterward he spoke with Ranfrid. Ramborg, who was standing by her mother, called out aloud, "I mind you quite well. I know who you are." Simon lifted the child up a little and twirled her round. "'Tis well done of you, Ramborg, not to have forgotten me." Kristin he only greeted from some way off, and her father and mother said no word afterward of the meeting. But Kristin pondered much upon it. For all that had come and gone, it had been strange to see Simon Dar again as a wedded man. She remembered her own blind and all-yielding love for Erland in those days. Now, she felt, there was some change in it. The thought came to her. How if Simon had told his wife how they had come to part, he and she? But she knew he had kept silence. "For my father's sake," she thought scoffingly. 'Twas a poor showing and strange that she should be still living here, unwed, in her parents' house. But at least they were betrothed. Simon could see that they had had their way in spite of all. Whatever else Erland might have done, to her he had held faithfully, and she had not been loose or wanton. One evening in early spring, Ranfrid had to send down the valley to old Gunhild, the widow who sowed furs. The evening was so fair that Kristin asked if she might go. At last they gave her leave, since all the men were busy. It was after sunset, and a fine white frost haze was rising toward the gold-green sky. Kristin heard at each hoof-strike the brittle sound of the evening's ice as it broke and flew outwards in tinkling splinters. But from all the roadside breaks there was a happy noise of birds singing, softly but full-throated with spring, into the twilight. Kristin rode sharply downwards. She thought not much of anything, but felt only it was good to be abroad alone once more. She rode with her eyes fixed on the new moon sinking down toward the mountain ridge on the far side of the dale, and she had near fallen from her horse when he suddenly swerved aside and reared. She saw a dark body lying huddled together at the roadside, and at first she was afraid. The hateful fear that had passed into her blood, the fear of meeting people alone by the way, she could never quite be rid of, but she thought 'twas maybe a wayfaring man who had fallen sick. So when she had mastered her horse again, she turned and rode back, calling out to know who it was. The bundle stirred a little, and a voice said, "Methinks 'tis you yourself, Kristin Lavransdatter." "Brother Edvin?" she asked softly. She came near to thinking this was some phantom or some deviltry sent to trick her, but she went near to him. It was the old monk himself, and he could not raise himself from the ground without help. "Oh, my father, are you out wandering at this time of the year?" she said in wonder. "Praise be to God who sent you this way tonight," said the monk. Kristin saw that his whole body was shaking. "I was coming north to you folks, but my legs would carry me no further tonight. Almost I deemed 'twas God's will that I should lie down and die on the roads I have been wandering about on all my life. But I was fain to see you once again, my daughter." Kristin helped the monk up on her horse, then led it homeward by the bridle, holding him on. And all the time he was lamenting that now she would get her feet wet in the icy slush. She could hear him moaning softly with pain. He told her that he had been at Ayabu since Yule. Some rich farmers of the parish had vowed in the bad year to beautify their church with new adornments. But the work had gone slowly. He had been sick the last of the winter. The evil was in his stomach. It could bear no food, and he vomited blood. He believed himself he had not long to live, and he longed now to be home in his cloister, for he was fain to die there among his own brethren. But he had a mind first to come north up the dale one last time, and so he had set out along with the monk who came from Hamar to be the new prior of the pilgrim hospice at Rolstad. From Fron he had come on alone. I heard that you were betrothed," he said, "to that man, and then such a longing came on me to see you. It seemed to me a sore thing that should be our last meeting that time in the church at Oslo. It has been a heavy burden on my heart, Kristin, that you had strayed away into the path where there is no peace." Kristin kissed the monk's hand. "Truly, I know not, Father, what I have done, or how I have deserved it, that you should show me such great love." The monk answered in a low voice, "I had thought many a time, Kristin, that had it so befallen that we had met more often, then might you have come to be as my daughter in spirit." "Do you mean that you would have brought me to turn my heart to the holy life of the cloister?" asked Kristin. Then a little after she said, "Sigrid Eirik laid a command on me that, should I not win my father's consent and be wed with Erland, then must I join with a godly sisterhood and make atonement for my sins." "I have prayed many a time that the longing for the holy life might come to you," said Brother Edvin. "But not since you told me, well, you know. I would have had you come to God wearing your garland, Kristin." When they came to Jorundgard, Brother Edvin had to be lifted down and borne into his bed. They laid him in the old winter house in the hearth-room and cared for him most tenderly. He was very sick, and Sigrid Eirik came and tended him with medicines for the body and the soul. But the priest said the old man's sickness was cancer, and it could not be that he had long to live. Brother Edvin himself said that when he had gained a little strength, he would journey south again and try to come home to his own cloister. But Sigrid Eirik told the others he could not believe that this was to be thought of. It seemed to all at Jorundgard that a great peace and gladness had come to them with the monk. Folks came and went in the hearth-room all day long, and there was never any lack of watchers to sit at nights by the sick man. As many as had time flocked in to listen when Sigrid Eirik came over and read to the dying man from godly books, and they talked much with Brother Edvin of spiritual things, and though much of what he said was dark and veiled, even as his speech was wont to be, it seemed to these folks that he strengthened and comforted their souls, because each and all could see that Brother Edvin was wholly filled with the love of God. But the monk was fain to hear, too, of all kinds of other things. He asked the news of the parishes round, and had Lavrans tell him all the story of the evil year of drought. There were some folk who had betaken them to evil courses in that tribulation, turned to such helpers as Christian men should most abhor. Some way in, over the ridges west of the dale, was a place in the mountains where were certain great white stones of obscene shapes, and some men had fallen so low as to sacrifice boars and gibcats before these abominations. So Sigrid Eirik moved some of the boldest, most God-fearing farmers to come with him one night and break the stones to pieces. Lavrans had been with them, and could bear witness that the stones were all besmeared with blood, and there lay bones and other refuse all around them. 'Twas said that up in Heidal the people had had an old crone sit out on a great rock 3 Thursday nights, chanting ancient spells. One night Kristin sat alone with Brother Edvin. At midnight he woke up and seemed to be suffering great pain. Then he bade Kristin take the book of the miracles of the Virgin Mary, which Sigrid Eirik had lent to Brother Edvin, and read to him. Kristin was little used to read aloud, but she set herself down on the step of the bed and placed the candle by her side. She laid the book on her lap and read as well as she could. In a little while she saw that the sick man was lying with teeth set tight, clenching his wasted hands as the fits of agony took him. "You are suffering much, dear father," said Kristin sorrowfully. "It seems so to me now, but I know 'tis but that God has made me a little child again and is tossing me about up and down. I mind me one time when I was little. 4 winters old I was. I had run away from home into the woods. I lost myself and wandered about many days and nights. My mother was with the folks that found me, and when she caught me up in her arms, I remember she bit me on the neck. I thought it was that she was angry, but afterward I knew better. I long myself now to be home out of this forest. It is written, forsake ye all things and follow me. But there has been all too much in this world that I had no mind to forsake." "You, father?" said Kristin. "Ever have I heard all men say that you have been a pattern for pure life and poverty and humility?" The monk laughed slyly. Aye, a young child like you thinks may be, there are no other lures in the world than pleasure and riches and power. But I say to you, these are small things men find by the wayside. And I have loved the ways themselves, not the small things of the world did I love, but the whole world. God gave me grace to love Lady Poverty and Lady Chastity from my youth up, and methought that with these playfellows it was safe to wander, and so I have roved and wandered, and would have been fain to roam over all the ways of the earth. And my heart and my thoughts have wandered and roamed too. I fear me I have often gone astray in my thoughts on the most hidden things. But now 'tis all over, little Kristin. I will home now to my house, and lay aside all my own thoughts and hearken to the clear words of the guardian, telling what I should believe and think concerning my sin and the mercy of God." A little while after, he dropped asleep. Kristin went and sat by the hearth, tending the fire. But well on in the morning, when she was nigh to dozing off herself, of a sudden brother Edvin spoke from the bed. "I am glad, Kristin, that this matter of you and Erla Nikolausen is brought to a good end." Kristin burst out weeping. "We have done so much wrong before we came so far, and what gnaws at my heart most is that I have brought my father so much sorrow. He has no joy in this wedding either, and even so he knows not. Did he know everything, I think he would take his kindness quite from me." "Kristin," said brother Edvin gently, "don't you see, child, that this is why you must keep it from him, and 'tis why you must give him no more cause of sorrow, because he will never call on you to pay the penalty. Nothing you could do could turn your father's heart from you." A few days later, brother Edvin was grown so much better that he would fain set out on his journey southward. Since his heart was set on this, Lavrans had a kind of litter made to be slung between 2 horses, and on this he brought the sick man as far south as to Lidstad. There they gave him fresh horses and men to send him on his way, and in this wise was he brought as far as Hamar. There he died in the cloister of the preaching friars, and was buried in their church. Afterward the barefoot friars claimed that his body should be delivered to them, for that many folks all about in the parishes held him to be a holy man, and spoke of him by the name of Saint Edvin. The peasants of the uplands and the dales, all the way north to Trondheim, prayed to him as a saint. So it came about that there was a long dispute between the 2 orders about his body. Kristin heard naught of this till long after. but she grieved sorely at parting from the monk. It seemed to her that he alone knew all her life. He had known the innocent child as she was in her father's keeping, and he had known her secret life with Erland, so that he was, as it were, a link binding together all that had first been dear to her with all that now filled her heart and mind. Now was she quite cut off from herself as she had been in the time when she was yet a maid.